welcome to the deep dive. Today we're embarking on a pretty fast-paced exploration of global power dynamics.
Right.
We're going to connect the dots on a whole stack of complex material. Everything from this quiet, almost invisible digital assault on the U.S. dollar.
All the way to hot conflicts, to the really brutal escalations we're seeing in Europe and the Middle East.
And then bring it right down to the ideological level. These battles for information, for control of the narrative.
And it's so crucial to see that these things are not happening in a vacuum. A new payment method, a drone attack, a decision in Brussels about frozen assets.
They're all connected.
They are all symptoms of a global power structure that is fundamentally changing. The world's financial strategies and its military objectives are, they're so deeply intertwined now, you can't really separate them.
Exactly. We're tracking currency wars that are creating just massive economic collateral damage.
And that damage is forcing these huge geopolitical recalculations everywhere.
And this is what we want to do for you today. This dive is really designed to give you that crucial context for why the world feels so, so fractured.
Mm-hmm.
Because the rules of the game, the rules that govern finance and security for the last 50 years?
Yeah,
they're being rewritten now, in real time.
Yeah.
So let's start with the financial deep dive. And I think we have to begin with this structural imbalance that's existed for decades.
Right.
You just have to look at the numbers. The U.S. dollar makes up about 65% of global currency usage.
Which is just an enormous amount of built-in demand.
But then you compare that to the actual size of the U.S. economy.
And it's completely out of whack. The U.S. is, less than 27% of global GDP, and China's share of global trade is actually bigger.
So that 67% number, it's totally out of sync with what's actually happening on the ground economically.
And that profound disparity, that massive gap between reality and demand, that's been the ultimate financial lifeline for the U.S.
A lifeline.
Because that constant, perpetual global demand for dollars, everyone needing them for trade, for reserves, that is the only thing preventing the U.S. bond market from entering a catastrophic crisis.
Okay, so tell us why that stability is so critical right now. What's the immediate pressure point?
The immediate pressure point is what a lot of analysts are calling the wall of debt.
The wall of debt.
The U.S. Treasury is facing a staggering amount of debt coming due in 2026. We're talking over $8 trillion in maturing bonds.
$8 trillion. And that all has to be refinanced.
It has to be refinanced. And historically, a huge portion of that is absorbed by foreign buyers.
Right, because they need to hold dollars.
They need dollars in their reserve accounts. Foreign money right now accounts for over 30% of the demand for U.S. debt.
So if that global demand for the dollar starts to slip, even a little bit,
then those foreign buyers start to walk away from that 30% share.
And if that happens, the whole plan to refinance that $8 trillion, keeping rates low enough to manage the interest, but still printing money to cover the deficit, it just becomes completely unstable.
It falls apart. They need that foreign cash, and they need it now.
Okay, so let's pivot to China's perspective on this.
Right. Because from Beijing's point of view, they have a trade and manufacturing sector, an overall economy, that's bigger than the entire European Union combined.
And yet their currency, the renminbi or the yuan,
it accounts for less than 3% of world currency usage.
That's an incredible discrepancy.
And Beijing sees this not just as a missed opportunity, but as a critical existential vulnerability. As long as they're forced to trade in dollars, they are exposed to every possible U.S. sanction.
So their goal is really twofold. Close that gap for economic leverage, but maybe more importantly, sanction-proof their entire trade network.
Exactly.
So if the traditional ways of doing that are too slow, what's their nuclear option?
Digital yuan. And the single biggest advantage it gives them is operational invisibility.
Invisibility to Washington.
To Washington. The digital yuan basically removes the paper trail that the Western banking system, relies on. A normal dollar transaction through SWIFT, it leaves a trace.
It's transparent.
The digital yuan turns those same payments into a complete black box. So if a country is buying Iranian oil, for example, and paying directly in digital RMB,
the U.S. loses the ability to track it. They can't monitor the funds, and therefore they can't enforce sanctions.
Their financial influence just disappears in that transaction.
And this isn't theoretical. The adoption is already happening, right? We're not talking about small players.
Not at all. We're seeing financial analyses confirming that major global banks, we're talking titans like HSBC, Standard Chartered, have been part of China's digital currency network since 2023.
That is a massive endorsement.
It's huge. It suggests they see the writing on the wall. They know that eventually Chinese exports, which fuel everything, will be priced and settled in RMB.
They're just getting ahead of the curve.
They're strategically aligning themselves. But the real game changer, the thing that takes this to the next level, is the financial incentive they're offering.
Right.
The People's Bank of China, the PBOC, is ordering commercial banks to pay interest on digital yuan balances. Just think about that for a second.
So holding the currency actually makes you money.
It turns it into a savings account. It's an aggressive, very explicit move to pull everyone, domestic firms, foreign central banks, trading partners, away from the dollar.
And the timing is perfect, with the dollar showing weakness and the RMB strengthening past that 7 per dollar mark for the first time in a while.
And the reason the strategy works, the reason it's so potent, comes down to a simple cost comparison.
Okay.
China is, as they say, flushed with liquidity. It's an ultra-low interest rate environment. Chinese banks can borrow from their central bank at, like, 1.5%.
Which is incredibly low.
So for them to pay a little interest on digital RMB balances, it's easy. It doesn't hurt their margins.
A move that U.S. banks they
Yeah.
simply cannot match.
Impossible. Their funding costs are hovering near 4%. If they tried to compete, their margins would completely collapse,
So the only way for the U.S. to counter would be for the Treasury to directly subsidize them.
which would mean adding hundreds of billions to an already staggering fiscal deficit.
Undermining the entire plan to refinance that $8 trillion debt wall in the first place.
It's an unanswerable dilemma for the U.S., and the scale of this thing is enormous. Reports are confirming China's already processed nearly 3.5 billion digital transactions,
Wow.
valued at about 16.7 trillion RMB. Most of that's domestic for now, but the international push is accelerating.
And the whole market is exploding. The overall stablecoin market is predicted to go from, around $3 trillion today to
To an almost unimaginable $50 trillion in just 5 years.
$50 trillion in 5 years. That is a mind-boggling rate of change.
And if China captures even a decent chunk of that growth, the consequences for dollar hegemony are immediate and severe.
So who are they targeting with this expansion? It seems like they're focusing on nations that aren't, let's say, tightly aligned with the West.
That's exactly the strategy. It explicitly targets the global majority, the BRICS nations, growing economies in Africa, developing Asia, places where trade with China is just booming.
They're leveraging real, tangible trade needs.
Yes, and we see clear examples of this playing out. Take Uruguay.
Okay, in Latin America.
Historically, one of the most dollarized economies in the region. But now they're facing these acute dollar shortages, which is crushing their economy. They have a massive incentive to find an alternative.
And China is their biggest trading partner.
By far.
Yeah.
Especially for huge agricultural exports like soybeans and meat. So China doesn't have to convince Uruguay to just dump the dollar overnight.
No, they just have to offer a better way to do business.
They just offer digital RMB wallets, settle the payment for the soybeans in RMB, and then Uruguay can turn around and use that exact same RMB to buy the electronics it imports from China.
It's a self-contained, closed-loop system.
It completely bypasses the need for the dollar.
Which brings us to the U.S. counter-strategy, or maybe we should call it the digital defense.
It is a defense. The U.S. Treasury Secretary is making this enormous bet, essentially staking the future of the Treasury market on stablecoin adoption.
So the idea is to issue stablecoins that are pegged to the dollar.
And, this is the crucial part, they're backed by U.S. Treasury bills.
So that's how they keep the demand for U.S. debt going.
That's the plan. Keep the capital flowing into the U.S. debt market. But the digital yuan, which actually pays you interest and is linked to the world's factory.
It's a pretty potent threat to that plan.
It's a logical threat. I mean, if you're a developing nation and you mostly import from China, why would you hold a U.S. stablecoin that pays no interest and has political risk attached?
Right, when you could hold the interest-bearing currency of your main trading partner.
Exactly.
And that question of political risk you just mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
It's been magnified, hasn't it, by the West's latest financial move.
It absolutely has. We have to talk about what some have called the Great Bank Robbery.
The G7's decision to weaponize the interest from the $300 billion in frozen Russian sovereign assets.
To use it to fund Ukraine. This is a truly unprecedented action in modern finance.
Why is it so unprecedented?
Because the interest legally belongs to the owner of the principal, in this case, Russia. By deciding to seize that interest, the West is fundamentally breaking the golden rule of global finance. Sovereign immunity.
So it turns Western central banks and clearinghouses into
Political weapons. It blurs the line between a legal depositary and a political confiscator.
And this isn't just a short-term problem. This erodes trust across the entire system.
Completely. You have countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, China, all of them holding trillions in U.S. treasuries and Eurobonds, and they are watching this very, very closely.
And they're asking themselves, if we disagree with Western policy tomorrow, are our national savings next on the chopping block?
And the answer the G7 just gave them is a resounding yes. This is seen by much of the world as, political expropriation disguised as creative finance.
And isn't it true that the immediate cost of this is being paid disproportionately by Europe?
Oh, absolutely. The vast majority of those frozen assets are held in a place called Euroclear, which is in Belgium.
And Euroclear is supposed to be what? The neutral plumbing of the European financial system.
That's the perfect way to put it. It's supposed to be the Switzerland of European finance, impartial, reliable, boring.
And by weaponizing it.
The European Union is risking the entire credibility of the euro as a reserve currency. If global players think the euro is politically compromised, that it can be seized on a whim, that capital is going to flow out.
Which, ironically, probably benefits the U.S., which needs that capital to fund its debt wall.
It does. Europe is effectively sacrificing its own financial integrity to prosecute this proxy war.
But Russia wasn't just sitting back and watching this happen. They were setting a trap.
They absolutely were. They were preparing a countermove. See, Russia holds billions and billions of dollars worth of Western corporate assets hostage inside its borders.
We're talking about actual physical things.
Physical factories, German car plants, huge investment funds held by groups like BlackRock, infrastructure built by Western multinationals.
So the moment the West officially seizes that interest,
Russia will inevitably seize these Western corporate assets in retaliation. And the trade here is just terrible for the West.
how so?
Russia gets real productive infrastructure, factories that make things and employ people. The West gets numbers on a screen interest earnings that cover a tiny fraction of the cost of the conflict.
And the Western companies that lose their assets will then sue their own governments for provoking the loss.
It's what one analyst called a catastrophic trade. He said they're burning down the credibility of the entire Western financial system for 2 weeks of ammunition.
And the long-term cost, through inflation and a weaker currency, gets paid by Western citizens when foreign buyers just permanently reduce how much U.S. and European debt they're willing to hold.
That's the end game.
Okay, let's shift our focus now from that financial battlefield to the kinetic war zones. Looking at the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the escalation seems to be getting, well, pretty dramatic.
It is. One of the most alarming recent reports was a claim from Russia that Ukraine launched a massive drone attack.
How massive?
91 drones in total, supposedly targeting President Putin's residence near Valdai.
And the timing of that is interesting, to say the least.
It's undeniably provocative. It happened right after those high-profile Trump-Zelensky talks at Mar-a-Lago.
And why you can never get official confirmation.
The circumstantial evidence makes it plausible. I mean, Zelensky had just publicly wished for Putin's death, and Ukraine has shown again and again that they can and will strike deep inside Russia.
Like the drone strike on the Kremlin roof.
Exactly. But it's the confusion over the target that really raises the stakes here.
What do you mean?
Was the target just the residence, or was it potentially this highly secretive nuclear command bunker that is believed to be located right underneath that same area?
Wow. Okay, so targeting a nuclear command center, even if it's just an attempt.
It would fundamentally challenge Russia's nuclear doctrine.
Because their doctrine is very clear about the conditions for retaliation.
And an existential threat to their command and control structure comes extremely close to meeting those conditions. Russia sees these deep strikes as a policy of state terrorism, and they vowed retaliation, which, as we've seen, they tend to carry out.
So, looking at the actual front lines, the military reality on the ground, the consensus seems to be that this is a war of attrition.
It is, and Russia's strategy, from what analysts are reporting, prioritizes the total destruction of the Ukrainian armed forces over just grabbing territory quickly.
So they're focused on destroying their ability to fight their logistics.
Which means we shouldn't expect some slow, predictable, kilometer-by-kilometer decline. The collapse of the Ukrainian military, if it happens, will likely be nonlinear.
What does that mean, nonlinear?
A sudden, rapid burst, a point where formations, deprived of experienced soldiers and critical supplies, just disintegrate all at once.
And we're already seeing the signs of that pressure. constant Russian advances, taking key positions.
Right, like Krasnogorivka and Guyapol, and critically, they're getting very close to Chasov Yar.
And Chasov Yar is immensely important. It's on high ground. It's a key supply hub.
That's it. So the strategic endgame is being clearly telegraphed by these moves. The objectives seem to be surrounding and destroying the Ukrainian forces in the Sloviansk and Kramatorsk salient.
The major urban centers still under Ukrainian control.
But the most critical maneuver, the one with the most momentum right now, is the push towards Zaporizhia city.
Why is Zaporizhia city such a non-negotiable objective for Russia? And why would it be an existential crisis for Ukraine?
Because Zaporizhia sits right on the Dnieper River.
The main artery.
The main artery. If that city falls, it would cut the critical transport route between East and West Ukraine. It would sever supply lines and isolate all the forces in the south.
An immediate, unsustainable logistical crisis.
Yes. And the long-term, ultimate prize for Russia remains Odessa. Take that, and you completely neutralize Ukraine as a platform for attacking Russian interests in the Black Sea.
This dire military picture leads us right to the negotiation deadlock. After those talks at Mar-a-Lago, Zelensky seems to be holding firm. No settlement.
He's refusing to withdraw, refusing to accept any ceasefire, which he just sees as giving Russia a chance to regroup and rearm.
And he's clearly not happy with the level of Western aid.
He's constantly demanding more money, more advanced weapons. He's especially unhappy with conditional loans, like that $90 billion package from Europe, which always come with strings attached.
But the U.S. position, as reported after that meeting, was pretty blunt.
It was. The message from Trump officials was reportedly, drop all ideas of ceasefires or freezes, move to a final settlement.
Why so assertive?
Because the U.S. is operating from a position of, well, pure strategic interest now. They know Russia will never agree to a pause that lets Ukraine rearm.
So the core U.S. interest has shifted.
It's shifted to stabilizing Europe as quickly as possible so that all those resources, military, financial, can be refocused on the main challenge. Containing China.
For the U.S., it's no longer about victory in Ukraine. It's about ending the fighting.
Exactly. Just achieving cessation of hostilities.
Now, you contrast that with the position of some key European leaders.
Right. Figures like Germany's Merz, who are driven by an almost mankind worldview.
Good versus evil.
A battle of absolute good versus absolute evil. And this ideological fixation is so dangerous because it eliminates any possibility of a pragmatic compromise.
They seem to genuinely fear any settlement that doesn't result in Russia being, what, de-radicalized?
De-radicalized or cleansed. They're explicitly drawing analogies to post-World War II Japan and Germany, suggesting Russia needs some kind of profound psychological and political rehabilitation imposed by the West.
That feels completely divorced from the military reality on the ground.
It is. And it fuels the continuation of this war of attrition, even at Ukraine's expense. Germany, for instance, is reportedly taking on a central logistics role in NATO planning for future conflicts.
So they're preparing for a long haul.
They're treating any hybrid attack, cyber, drones, disinformation, as an act of war. This ideological commitment to a new Cold War is why many of them have said an outright war might be preferable to what they call a bad peace.
They've strategically sacrificed Ukraine's immediate security to set the stage for this renewed conflict.
Using the Russian threat to justify massive rearmament.
Okay, let's move south to the Middle East. Tensions between Israel and Iran are, as always, simmering dangerously close to a boiling point.
Right. We know Netanyahu recently met with Trump looking for support for more military action against Iran.
And what was the specific focus of that request this time?
The focus has actually shifted. It's moved beyond Iran's nuclear program, which was always the stated goal, to their rapidly developing ballistic missile umbrella.
So Iran has built up a significant missile capability.
A deep, layered, very sophisticated defensive and offensive missile capacity. And that complicates any preemptive strike scenario immensely. Netanyahu wants to neutralize that threat.
And how is Iran reacting to all this?
Well, they're fully aware of what's at stake. The Iranian president described the situation as a full-scale war with the U.S., Israel, and Europe.
A full-scale war.
And he explicitly said that the economic sanctions, which are designed to hurt ordinary people, have made this confrontation much harder than the Iran-Iraq war in the 80s.
So they're feeling the squeeze. But are they actually prepared for a kinetic conflict?
The intelligence reports really emphasize a key difference here. Iran is far more prepared for a conflict now than it's ever been.
They've learned from past engagements.
Extensively. They know how to prepare for surprise attacks, how to leverage their missile network, so both Israel and the U.S. face huge risks with another round of war, especially since past attempts at regime change have failed so spectacularly.
Escalating threats is one thing, implementing them is another.
A whole other story.
And regionally, we're also seeing cracks in some of these alliances.
Yeah.
The UAE just pulled its military out of Yemen.
Right, after a Saudi strike. And that signals significant instability, a growing rift among these supposed allies. The Gulf states are increasingly prioritizing their own security over these long, costly proxy wars.
Which suggests a gradual decoupling from U.S. and Israeli policy in the region.
I think so.
And that challenge to U.S. influence is even more pronounced when you look at Latin America. Venezuela has become a new, highly contested front.
It really has. Russia and China recently called for an emergency UN Security Council meeting just to condemn the U.S. blockade and the seizure of Venezuelan oil tankers.
So it's not just a diplomatic protest.
Oh, no, it's material. They are actively violating the U.S. blockade using these large shadow fleets.
Sky flakes.
Tankers that operate without easily detectable insurance or flagging. They're using them to deliver critical goods to Venezuela.
What kind of goods?
Essential oil, arms, and sensitive technology, especially from Huawei. You have to remember, Venezuela is still a critical source of heavy crude for China, and they've been steadily increasing their imports, completely bypassing U.S. sanctions.
And the official U.S. strategy here is to assert a kind of corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, right? To keep Russia and China out of the hemisphere.
That's the stated policy. But the ongoing Russian and Chinese material support for Maduro, the military aircraft, the economic backing, it just demonstrates the practical limits of U.S. influence now.
This is a textbook example of a multipolar world emerging.
It is. China and Russia are directly challenging U.S. supremacy, and they're doing it by supporting Venezuela's sovereignty against what they condemn as unilateral coercion by Washington.
Okay, let's transition to the third front in all this. The war of ideas, the battle for control of information. And we can start with a really profound ideological rift, right at the heart of one of the world's oldest religions, the conflict over the very definition of Jewish identity.
Specifically, the religious opposition to Zionism. And this is a deeply fundamental conflict. For non-Zionist religious Jews, the rise of Zionism is seen as a direct attack on the nature of Judaism itself.
How so?
Historically, Judaism was understood as a covenant, a religion like Christianity or Islam. Zionism came along and redefined it as a nationality, a geopolitical identity, putting it in the same category as being, say, French.
And the religious critique takes that a step further, framing it as a form of idolatry.
That's the core of the religious argument. Traditional Jewish theology centers on the covenant with God. To be Jewish is to be defined by that spiritual relationship.
Okay.
The claim of idolatry comes from the idea that by creating a national identity based on geography, military power, secular self-determination, all things outside, that covenant Zionism introduces a form of foreign worship. It elevates nationalism to a religious status.
Which violates the core tenets of traditional Judaism.
Exactly.
And proponents of Zionism often have a very specific tactic to dismiss this kind of opposition.
Yes, what we could call the messianic misdirection.
Explain that.
They promote the idea that the only reason religious Jews oppose the state is because they're patiently waiting for the Messiah to return.
So it's a way to paint them as
crazy religious fanatics who are out of touch with modern reality. And it's a very effective tactic because it completely obscures the actual history, that Zionism was a deliberate political movement that synthesized a brand new identity.
an identity that involved creating modern Hebrew as a spoken language and even secularizing religious holidays.
Precisely. Religious holidays were reinterpreted to fit this new national story. Passover, a commemoration of God's intervention, becomes a celebration of freedom from slavery in the modern national sense.
And Hanukkah becomes a celebration of military victory and secular self-determination.
It's a complete reframing, and the ideology itself is often criticized for lacking, an intellectually coherent definition. It invokes religion or secularism depending entirely on the political need.
You see that with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who will often use evangelical Christian interpretations of biblical prophecy.
Right. He'll cite Ezekiel 37, the dry bones prophecy, to justify the modern state to a massive Christian political base, rather than using traditional rabbinic interpretation. It's that flexibility that is key to its political survival.
Okay, so let's move from that ideological battleground to the active war for information control. Specifically, the influence of Israel's elite military intelligence.
Unit 8200.
Unit 8200.
This is Israel's most elite intelligence unit, famous globally for its tech prowess, its involvement in a massive international spy network. And the reports we're seeing confirm that veterans of this unit are now heavily embedded in critical roles within major global tech platforms.
Which platforms are we talking about? What kind of roles?
The big ones.
Yeah.
Metaso, Facebook and Instagram, Google, Microsoft. And the veterans hold positions with immense power over information flow, roles in trust and safety, threat intelligence, and most importantly, content moderation.
So you have a significant group of people trained in a foreign military intelligence apparatus who have effectively become the gatekeepers of global speech.
For billions of people worldwide. And this isn't just about individual employment, it's formalized. Reports confirm Meta has a formal partnership with Israel's cyber unit.
A formal partnership.
Israeli officials can flag content for removal, and Meta reportedly complies with those requests at one of the highest rates in the world, far higher than for other governments.
The implication there is pretty stark. A foreign military intelligence structure is directly shaping what billions of people are allowed to see and say online.
It is.
This kind of information gatekeeping leads us to think about how quickly domestic political narratives can be shaped or even fractured when trust in that system just evaporates.
Right.
We should probably touch on the very specific and suspicious circumstantial evidence around the TPUSA shooting that resulted in Charlie Kirk's death.
It's a prime example. The initial suspicion right after it happened stemmed from the perceived political timing.
Because Kirk had reportedly grown disillusioned with the pro-Israel cause.
Yes, and allegedly told people he was planning to exit that political framework. So the suddenness of the shooting right after that supposed shift, it just fueled this intense online scrutiny.
And a lot of that scrutiny focused on the actions of the TPUSA audiovisual tech, a guy named Terrell Farnsworth.
It did. The focus was on his alleged behavior right after the incident. Reports suggested he took the SD card from the camera, the only camera card removed, and then shortly after took a selfie video at the scene.
And his story about why he took the card was supposedly conflicting.
Allegedly, yes. And that just added fuel to the fire.
Then you have these strange peripheral connections that online investigators started uncovering. Legal ties, aviation ties.
Right. The reports that Farnsworth's cousin is a lawyer who is now on the defense team for the alleged shooter, Tyler Robinson. That dual connection was immediately flagged as a potential conflict of interest.
And then there was the link between Farnsworth's father-in-law and an executive role at Duncan Aviation.
A company that was then allegedly tied to suspicious Egyptian-registered planes tracked near the event. It's this complex web of relationships that added layers of suspicion far beyond just a tragic accident.
And even the legal representation for the alleged shooter, Robinson, came under scrutiny?
It did. One of his attorneys is the cousin. The other was allegedly handpicked by the prosecution in a way that some analysts called a rubber stamp.
Raising questions about whether the alleged shooter is just being, railroaded as a convenient fall guy in a case that is clearly much more complicated.
Exactly.
And just to close this section out, we should note the sheer bizarreness of the information landscape right now, the weird digital clues that get dropped into the public sphere.
That social media post is a perfect example. A major political figure posts an image claiming to be a bald eagle killed by a windmill.
But it was actually a dead falcon.
Yeah.
In Israel from 2017.
Right. And what made it so strange was the metadata that was deliberately left visible on the image. The timestamp 4.44, the label Tower 13, the date 9/11, the whole combination of a false image and these weird digital breadcrumbs was just unsettling. It reflects a deeply manipulated information environment.
So we've completed a pretty extensive deep dive today, and the conclusion seems pretty clear. The global system is undergoing this massive, violent fracturing across three key domains.
That's right. The financial architecture of the dollar is under direct digital threat from China's interest-bearing yuan,
forcing the U.S. into its own risky, stablecoin-backed debt scheme.
At the same time, military conflicts are escalating into these brutal existential wars of attrition, especially in Ukraine, and they're being driven by these deeply entrenched ideological hardlines in Europe.
And the war for information is being waged at the highest levels through gatekeepers embedded in our most powerful tech platforms, and it's causing this rapid disintegration of trust in our own domestic institutions.
And if you connect all those threads, the collapse of sovereign immunity, the challenge to the Monroe Doctrine in Venezuela, the ideological battle over identity, the digital currency war, the underlying theme that ties it all together is sovereignty.
Sovereignty.
Economic sovereignty. Will trade be dictated by the dollar or the RMB? Political sovereignty. Can nations like Venezuela escape the U.S. orbit with help from Russia and China? And ideological sovereignty. The battle over cultural and religious definitions.
We are witnessing the very unpredictable emergence of a truly multipolar era.
Which raises a really important final question for all the nations caught in the middle. What is the cost of choosing a side in this fracturing world? And we can look at Argentina as a stark, provocative final thought on this. President Javier Milei, right after his election, went all in. He aligned completely with U.S. and Israeli interests.
He bet everything on the established Western hegemony.
He did. He converted to Judaism, implemented this sweeping, abrupt free market capitalism, and the results were, well, they were immediate and catastrophic.
Catastrophic.
Almost immediately after he made that choice, poverty hit a 20-year high. Argentina's GDP shrank by over 5%. For the first time in 2 decades, they recorded negative foreign investment.
No.
Debt to the IMF went up by $34 billion. His rapid total alignment with what he saw as the dominant power was immediately followed by economic collapse and a sharp withdrawal of foreign investment.
So the final question for you to think about is this. What does Argentina's dramatic collapse signal for other developing nations that are considering that same path of total alignment with a shifting and increasingly shaky global power structure?
That is a question worth some serious contemplation as the geopolitical plates continue to shift right under our feet.